It's day 3 of Cathay Week, and you may have seen some online hubbub about the Sky Lanterns and the cannons specifically, and how they are maybe a little bit too good for their points cost. So, I want to talk specifically about Sky Lanterns and the cannons. I want to talk about why they're good, what makes them good. I want to think about what sort of list building we're going to be doing with them. Do they fit into the normal Grand Army, or is it mostly just a case of shoehorning in, as many of these and having an army that's entirely boats and guns, which, I think is going to be a very valid way of playing. And then also start to think about the sort of things that you can do to counter this style of army. Now, I will admit, I haven't fully got there yet. It is still early in the thought process. Got ideas percolating, but we'll sort of work through that later on in the video. And then maybe towards the end of the week, we can do something where maybe I look at doing a couple of games with the Lanterns. One game into just a generic army, which is going to struggle with it, and then one game into a list specifically designed to counter it. See if there's something that we can do there, work out what the answer is going to be outside of just Falconhorn and or Banner of the Warped Moon, which are the very obvious choices. So let's start off with the Sky Lantern. What makes the Sky Lantern good? Well, it is pretty nuts in terms of stat line. It is the most tanky unit I think I know outside of actual monsters. On a points per wound basis for heavy chariots, it is fairly cheap, I think it's fair to say. So, it's a toughness 5 chariot, it's 7 wounds, and it comes in with a 4-up armor save. If you look at other chariots, if you're looking at specifically toughness 5 chariots, I haven't done the maths in it, but I think you're typically looking at 25-30ish points per wound, depending on whether you're going from something like the normal Chaos Chariot, the Chosen Chariot, the Black Orc Chariots. They can get a little bit more pricey. So, you're paying more, and then for this you're looking at under 20 points per wound. So, pretty cheap, and it's all bundled together in a fairly resilient package. So, toughness 5, 7 wounds, 4-up armor save. Heavy Chariot, which means that its impact hits, D3+1, do come in at AP2, and it's got strength 5 there as well. So it's no slouch on the charge, you can get a little bit of output there. And then the meat and potatoes comes in when we look at the actual rules and guns that you've got on there. So there's 2 direct options to go for if we just skip straight to the guns, starting off with the Sky Lantern Crane guns. These are free, and you can also take the Iron Hail guns for free, but you have to make some choices here. So first of all, if you're going for the Sky Lantern Crane guns, 36-inch range, so very easy to play around with this. You can just keep to the outside of the board very easily. Strength 6, AP2, Armor Bane 2, Cumbersome. Cumbersome means that you can't stand and shoot with them, but the only penalties you're likely going to be taking with this is moving and shooting. So you're hitting on 4s most of the time with each gun, and remember there are 4 gunners and 1 champion, so you'll have 4 shots hitting on 4s and then 1 shot hitting on 3s after the single -1 to hit modifier. What does that mean? Well, that's on average 2.6 hits, which is not bad per gun. They're coming in, obviously, as we said, Strength 6, AP2, Armor Bane 2, so this will mulch through. Knights will die very quickly to it. When I was talking to Tom yesterday, he said that he was playing against Richie, who had a Toughness 9 Anvil, and that died in a couple of rounds of shooting because of all of the Sky Lantern Crane guns he had. There's a lot that you can layer on top there. These things are going to be good at taking out high-value targets. Not great at killing chaff, but, lots of people are running big, units of 5, units of 6 cavalry. They're running potentially chariots. Like if you came up against High Elves and they had a couple of the Sky Cutters, which in comparison, very similar sort of price point if you put a gun on them, your toughness 4 with a 4-up armor save and only 4 wounds, you'll find that model's going to fall over very quickly, as opposed to this unit, which is going to take a lot of damage. Even though it's multiple wounds 2 on the Sky Cutters, you're going to find that it's going to be, you'd need 4 of those to go through. It's a lot of dice rolls to actually kill a single one of these lanterns. So a lot of wounds, a lot of tankiness combined, along with a good ranged gun, or you go for the Iron Hail gun. Now this is the loadout that I prefer, and it's definitely riskier. But if I'm thinking about how I want to use this sort of unit, I don't think a relatively mobile gun line that just sort of flies around the board and tries to keep away from its opponents is fine. I think the real strength of this is going to come in the Iron Hail guns, and the main reason for that is if you go for, as we see here, the Sky Lantern Crane gun, you can't also combo that with the Dragon Fire Bombs or the Gunpowder Bombs, which would give you a short range shooting option as well. So if you're going for the Crane guns, you're saying that this is going to be a long range fire platform. I'm never planning on getting close. Iron Hail guns, however, 12-inch range, strength 3 AP1, which is fine, it's not exciting. Move and shoot, multiple shots D3, and it doesn't take negative modifiers for long range, multiple shots, or stand and shoot. So again, the only modifier you're likely going to be making with this one is, -1 for moving, because this is always going to be moving. And even though you don't take penalties for stand and shoot, you don't have quick shots, so you are going to be a little bit limited in terms of whether you're going to be able to get those shots to bear. You also then get one of the 2 sets of grenades. So if you look at the gunpowder bombs, they're fine and they're free, and I maybe you end up going with these just because they are free. But the upgraded version, the Dragonfire bombs, which is a 9-inch range gun, strength 4, AP -1, armor bane 1, flaming attacks is whatever, move and shoot, so you can still march and shoot these, quick shot, and if you hit, you do D3+1 hits to a target enemy unit. So this means that even though there's no rule saying you don't take penalties for multiple shots, you don't roll the multiple shots, you just get multiple hits if you get it through. So this is going to be the highest output you can get, but it does require you to be within 9 inches of the enemy unit, and that's going to be something that you either go for the Dragonfire bombs, or you go for the Iron Hell guns, depending on whether or not you can get that 3 inches closer, because sometimes that's going to be a little bit too risky, I think. Given that you've got reserve move in fact, let's go and have a look at the special rules now. Given that you've got reserve move, you're going to find that you can move forwards 8 inches, use your lumbering pivot because you're a heavy chariot, so at the end of your normal move, any move other than a march, you get to do a 90-degree pivot. Again, you're a chariot, so you've got a 360 line of sight, so you don't even have to be facing in the direction you shoot. You can move forwards, pivot 90 degrees so that you're perpendicular to where your opponent's unit's going to be. You can shoot the opponent, and then you just move another 8 inches forwards. I don't know if I said 9. So you move 8 forwards, pivot 90, move 8 forwards, pivot 90 to whichever direction you think you're going to need to face next time. You're almost certainly going to be out if your opponent's 90-degree charge arc. Throw a wheel in there, whatever you need to do. You've got a lot of flexibility moving forwards, and your opponent's going to have to get quite clever with setting up overlapping layers of traps with fast units to have a hope of catching these things in melee. So it's going to be really difficult to deal with them there. Speaking of catching them in melee, there are a lot of rules that stop you from really being too bothered about that. First of all, feigned flight and fire and flee. So fire and flee is you only go the highest of the 2d6 on the flee. You don't move 2d6, but you get to make a stand and shoot. Obviously, as we saw here, this gun here doesn't have any penalty for stand and shoot reactions, or you can use the Dragonfire bombs, whichever one you want to go for, whatever you think is going to be the most output at the time. All good stuff there. But at the end of it, you are still fleeing. Well, never mind, you've got feigned flight, you automatically rally. Why is this important? Because you're only fleeing d6, or the highest of 2d6 I should say, you're more likely to get caught than you would be if you didn't have, if you weren't firing and fleeing. And you haven't got swift stride as well, so you might end up just moving 3 or 4 inches backwards, at which point you're almost certainly going to get caught. That's fine, because feigned flight means that you automatically rally, so it's not even a problem. You fire and flee to get a little bit further back, make it harder for your opponent to make the charge, then you've done some combat res with the shooting, they get into you, they maybe do enough damage to beat you, or you do enough damage to beat them, and then you get to use one of your other special rules. Disengage. If you lose combat, do a leadership test, not a break test, just a leadership test, so no modifiers for the amount of combat that you lost by. Leadership 8, or if you've got a character on there, it's going to be leadership 9. If you pass the leadership test, you fall back in good order instead of giving ground, and then your opponent can only move 2 inches towards you but can't pursue. This means as long as you roll a 3 on the dice, you're going to get away. If you fail the leadership test, they get stuck in combat with you. That's, is what it is. And yeah, you're just, it's so difficult to pin this model in place because you've got so many rules that say, actually, no, I'd quite like not to. Speaking of not being trapped in combat if you don't want to, the characters that you're going to be putting on balloons, the Lord Magistrate or Strategists, they've got the Grand Strategist special rule. All friendly units within command range can use the character's leadership instead of their own. Great, sure, that's fine. But also, once per turn, a friendly unit that wins combat may choose to fall back in good order rather than making a follow-up or pursuit move. So this gives you so much flexibility in terms of where you end up, and there is a pretty good chance that you do win combat. Yes, you're relatively tanky, you're toughness 5, you've got 4 up armor save, you've got a good chunk of wounds, so you're probably not dying in one go. Even a dragon's going to struggle to eat you in one go, although they've got the best chance of doing it if they make it in. But if you do enough wounds with a stand and shoot, and then maybe chip off another couple of wounds with all of the hand weapon attacks you've got, you can, instead of following up or standing still, you could just take a test to fall back in good order instead. This is very reasonable. You'd have to... I guess you wouldn't even have to roll it. This takes out of the, you know, the leadership potential failure, because normally you have to test a restraint. Yeah, you wouldn't even test a restraint. You just automatically fall back in good order, move backwards away from the enemy unit, the highest of 2d6. Jobs are good. You're very safe. Don't do this if you're too near to a board edge, but I'm struggling to see how that would be something. Anyway, it just adds another level of reliability where it's very difficult for your opponent to pin you down. With Sky Cannons covered, okay, what is the other part of the puzzle that we're potentially going to be bringing? The Cathayan Grand Cannon, 130 points. It's a cannon, but it's also Strength 10, AP 3, Armor Bane 3, D3 plus 1, and has Thunderous Impact. Again, went over this already, so just as a quick reminder, what this does is it gives you a 2d6 blast point from where the cannonball initially lands before it does its bounce. 2d6 inches around that point is -1 modifier for movement, and all units that are in that range cannot use Swift Stride. That's pretty good. That means that it's very difficult for people to move aggressively towards you. You can take more risky positioning where you know that between the combination of a fire and flee and dropping your opponent's movement speed by, let's say, 3, they are mathematically impossible. You know, they wouldn't be able to catch you. This is more for units that don't have Swift Stride, but if you're against someone where they've got, you know, a big unit of Dragon Ogres, for example, and you want to stand in front of it and shoot it because you've got to whittle away at it, they've got a 13-inch declarable charge range. Put a couple of cannonballs near it so that they go down to an 11-inch declarable charge range. You can sit between that and 11 and 12 very comfortably, or you can even move forwards into that 9-inch bubble where you're able to use the Dragonfire bombs, and with your fire and flee, you're almost guaranteed to get out of there. Definitely some options to play around with. So, Thunder and Impact, very good, but what's got people really bothered, it is the Ogre Loader. This is obviously the artillery crew for 35 points more. You can give the unit gunpowder bombs, which gives them a stand and shoot as well, which is really funny, and I think is going to matter, because given how good this artillery is, I think we might see a little bit of a resurgence of a artillery meta. People bringing their own artillery to try and snipe out the enemy cannons. We'll see how that goes, but given that we've got, you know, the ability to give them gunpowder bombs for fairly cheap, stuff like Harpies, stuff like Warhounds or Eagles are going to have a real difficult time getting in and actually killing the crew, which is going to be nice for the just, you know, the pickup of 43 points. It gives you a lot of flexibility there. That's not the thing that people are bothered about. It's mostly the mercenary crew. This gives you +1 to movement and stubborn, which again is nice if you're near a board edge. You don't necessarily want to flee off the board if you're within, you know, over 6 inches is quite easy to do, but being 12 inches or further away from the board edge is more difficult to set up. Anyway, point being, once per game you get to fire twice or re-roll a single artillery dice. Now, re-rolling a single artillery dice is basically the same as firing twice, because you only do it when you're not going to get the output from the piece of artillery that you're looking at. So let's say, realistically, we're talking about a cannon. You fire your first cannon, it misfires, you then use your re-roll to, instead of firing twice, you just overwrite that re-roll, overwrite that misfire, gives you a second chance. It's almost like firing twice while also getting rid of the misfire there. This does mean that you can fire 6 cannonballs turn 1. Why is that important? Well, with 6 cannonballs, you can lower a unit's movement by 6 inches. I think that is unnecessary. It's probably more likely going to be good to lower, you know, one side of the board by 3 or 4 inches, the other side of the board by 2 or 3 inches, if that's how you wanted to use it as a tool, if you're really trying to slow down your opponent. Or you can hold on to them. You don't necessarily have to shoot it all out turn 1. You might go, I'm just going to shoot normally turn 1 because you haven't given me good angles. Then when you come out of the, you know, behind the building with your dragon or whatever, let's try and shoot 6 cannons into you, see if I can one round you, and if not, finish you off with the vast quantity of the Strength 4, AP 1, Armor Bane 1 shooting. So it's going to be wounding on 6s from the Dragonfire bombs as well, but any wound that actually goes through on a 6 is going to be AP 2, so you're getting a lot of value out of that. Hopefully I've painted something of a picture as to why the cannons are really good. What does it look like if we try to put it into an actual list? And this is going to be the just full pressure list, where we're looking at going very heavy on balloons. We're not necessarily worried about putting anything else in our character special rare, but I think having a wizard is just too strong to turn down, and it is also more incredible range damage. So in this list, I thought probably start off with a Shigangan Lord. This is just a generically tanky, quite difficult to remove character. It's reasonably okay in melee. That's not what we've loaded up to here to do. We've made it a level 4 wizard with battle magic, and we've given it the learned Feng Shi Bo, and that's just giving us a 5th spell. So very consistent. You're going to be sat there, you're going to be swapping into the Law of Yang magic missile, which is an 18-inch range magic missile. You're probably going to roll into Fireball, you're probably going to roll into Pillar of Fire, you'd hopefully get Arcane Urgency as well. You've built up the ability to have just multiple spells that are really valuable there. So this is some good output, and it also gives you that little bit of like, oh, 8 inches or 16 inches isn't going to be enough to get me out of charge arc. This one balloon specifically needs me to move again and again, and that gives you a bit more flexibility to get behind your opponent, get out of charge arcs, all of that good stuff. Then we've gone for a pair of strategists. You can go for the Lord Magistrates, because they're only 25 points more. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure that I would want to, unless I want to specifically spend more than 50 points on magic items, which, with these loadouts, I don't think we necessarily need to go for. With these ones, this list is a version that we're going to go with the crane guns. I don't think this is as good, but it's worth building around it and seeing what we can get out of it and what the differences are with the Drake guns. So we've got 2 strategists here on Sky Lanterns, both of them with crane guns, both of them with a ward save, one with Talisman of Protection, one with a Crystal of Kunlan, which is just a 5-up ward save, but every time you roll a 6, you also do some damage back to models back in melee, and when I say 6, I mean 6 on a ward save. So this is one that is not upset to be in base-to-base contact with, like, I don't know, clan rats or something like that. We've given them the Dragon Fire Bombs as well. I think just having them here for 10 points per character, I had a few points left over, it was very easy to fit those in. I just think it gives you a little bit of flexibility. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply to the whole unit. There's no way to give the unit the Dragon Fire Bombs and the Crane Guns as well, but sometimes, you know, just adding a little bit of spice to a stand and shoot there is nice to have. I'm not upset about that. Into core, there's multiple ways you can play around with core. You could go a couple of units of Jade Lancers and use them very similarly to the way that Empire used the Empire Knights, where you have potentially drilled and maybe even stubborn bricks if you want to go that way. Or what I've done here is take a unit of Jade Lancers with just a unit champion and given them the Ruby Ring of Ruin, and then given them drilled as well. This unit's going to start in marching column. They're going to walk around just at a normal speed, and then if they want to magic missile something, they've got the Ruby Ring of Ruin. If they ever need to get out of charge arcs, you know, they can potentially just drill their way around, or you could even get into combat if you want to, but their forte is not going to be melee. It's very much going to be do damage at range, be just tanky enough that it's annoying to take you out. You know, it's 6 wounds, T3, 3-up armor save. It's not super tanky, but incidental firepower's not going to get them. Putting peasant longbows into them is not going to kill them at a speed that's, you know, comfortable for your opponent, whereas you're just going to be chipping away with that Ruby Ring of Ruin. Then here I thought, what was the best way to not get caught? And I think the best way to do it while also keeping drops low, going for a unit of 20 Jade Warriors with drilled, so they can march around if they need to. This isn't ideal, it is an expensive brick, but it's only 186 points, so I'm assuming that this unit probably gets caught at some point during the game. And then 2 units of 8 Jade Warriors that aren't drilled. They do have a unit champion and a musician, and they're just going to start the game in marching column, and they're going to spend all game just marching around 2 wide, 4 deep, trying not to, you know, either march block my opponent or just trying to stay out of charge arcs, whatever is most important here. I think if you want to conserve more points, you could go for a second unit of Jade Lancers. That would be really good. But by doing this, we've got 1 unit here, which is regimental, and then I've got 2 detachment units, and this allows me to put all 3 of these model units here down as a single drop, lowering the number of drops, making it more likely that we get the +1 and we're able to get more turns of shooting into our opponent before they catch us, or have the chance to catch us. But yeah, there's definitely points to taste, and also this loadout here is very comfortably 500 points, so something I like about that. Then we've got triple cannon with Ogre Loader, so we can fire all of them twice, and 2 more Sky Lanterns. Like I said, this is the version that I like the least because it's gone for crane guns, so I think this is sort of... I think if you're less comfortable with the movement and spending the entire game going, I'm going to move into, you know, basically touching distance of you, but I have to position super perfectly, making sure that I'm not in any charge arcs. I've got to think about where I am on the next turn, and probably the turn after that, although you're relatively flexible. You've got to understand where you're going to be facing with your lumbering pivots. I'm not saying that you need to be a rocket scientist to play the Drake gun version, but it is going to be harder to play than the Crane gun version. So if you want to put this on the table and test it out, or play it in Warhol, and you're not really comfortable with the super in-depth movement, the Crane gun version is probably the place that I would start until you get a little bit more comfortable with it. Obviously, these Grand Cannons are going to be putting a lot of punishment downrange, especially on the first couple of turns, whenever you decide to use their once per turn reroll. And then look at the Drake gun version. Now this is, we did have to lose one of the balloons, which is one of the main reasons I think that the Crane gun version may have legs. So in terms of core, I've just copy and pasted the core across. This is exactly the same. Again, tweak it as you like, whether you want to go a couple of units of Jade Lancers, go lower on the Warriors, whatever works for you. Triple cannons again, triple Sky Lantern here. So instead of going, in fact, hold on, sorry, let me just double check. No, I haven't dropped a Sky Lantern at all. I just had to drop a character from it. That was it. So we've got 3 Sky Lanterns with Iron Hail Guns and the Dragon Firebombs. So that does make them 20 points more than we were looking at if we were just looking at the ones with the Crane Guns before. Or if you really, really need to shave points, you can do the same thing, but drop the Dragon Firebombs, go to the Gunpowder Bombs. The only downside is the Gunpowder Bombs are significantly worse. They're not better than the Iron Hail Guns. You'll only end up using them if you need them for a stand and shoot, when your opponent's within, minimum range for stand and shoot. But you could shave, 80 points across the list, which might mean that if you shave some points elsewhere, you're able to fit in another Sky Lantern. That might be something that's worth doing. Anyway, by the by. So we've got 1 character here with the 5-up ward save, and then we've got 3 Sky Lanterns with just the regular Iron Hail Gun, Dragon Fire Bombs. As well, keep in mind that you can always put an upgraded set of bombs on the Strategist. So this one specifically, while also being tankier, is going to be throwing out 5d6 sets. Sorry, not 5d6, that's ridiculous. 5 sets of the bombs. If I just scroll down to, 5 bombs which become d3 plus 1. So theoretically doing, if all of them hit, which they likely won't, 5d3 plus 5 hits there. Then we've got a Shagangan Lord, and I didn't actually really talk about this much, other than it's good you need a Dispel threat, and you've got the Battle Magic as well, but it does also give you some level of counterpunch that I think is worth having in the list as well. You could go, and I am very high on the Illusion Spectral Doppelganger build, but I don't think it's super worthwhile here. The thing that you could do is you could go Elementalism if you are less worried about putting the... because this version of the list has less AP in it. So Battle Magic is still good, but Elementalism, so you're picking up Wind Blast, you're picking up Plague of Rust, potentially picking up Travel Mystical Pathways, so you can teleport 1 balloon out of harm's way, and then still reserve move it after the shooting is done. That's a really strong option as well. It depends what happens to Pillar of Fire. If Pillar of Fire exists in its current state, I think I'm very tempted to just sort of stay with Battle Magic, but I think this version plays around Plague of Rust really well. And there is also the temptation to look and just put in the bound spell version of Plague of Rust instead of going for a full Elementalism caster. So a lot of options that you can play around with there, depending on what you want to go with. So let's have a think about what this might look like in practice. If we look at the game in terms of a matchup against, let's say, Warriors of Chaos, we've got here a fairly standard list. Let me just put the terrain flat. So here we've got a Marauder Horseman bunker over on the left by the hill. There's a wizard in there, Marker Zinch, your standard blaster caster, couple of Dragon Ogre Shaggoths, no upgrades other than their heavy armor and great weapon, couple of units of Vanguard Dogs, a big brick of Chaos Knights, and then we've got a Chaos Lord and a Warpfire Dragon. Given that there's really good artillery in this list, what I would expect to see is probably having the dragons hiding out of line of sight. It doesn't necessarily protect you fully, but you can start to try and hide. So in this example, the dogs here have vanguarded forwards on both sides to block line of sight. That means that if I'm firing down this line, yes, potentially I can see where the base of the dragon is, so I could drop on this base here, on the corner where I can see the model, but you can't do the 10 inches from the back of the base shenanigans because you can't see here, so you can only drop it literally on top of the dragon, at which point, if you're dropping it like here, for example, on a 2 you hit the dragon, on everything else you miss. So it's not a great way to snipe the dragon. It also means that if I'm firing here, yes, I can absolutely do the 10 inches from the back because I just measure from here to here. I can see the point here. Job's a good one, but it just makes it harder for these cannons over here to get line of sight. I haven't deployed or bothered deploying all the core. That's kind of irrelevant for what I'm talking about here. You just buy time with them, try and bait in your opponent, do various shenanigans with them. But in this case, what we're looking at here are the 4 Sky Lanterns, and this is assuming that we've gone for the full upgrades into the Iron Hail guns and the Dragon Fire bombs. There we go. Always get the name of that wrong. So we've got the bombs and the guns, and we want to be playing super aggro with this list. So what are we trying to do here? Assuming we go first, which is not unlikely, we've got a low number of drops, although our opponent does as well. What's our game 1 plan going to be? Well, these things move 8 inches, which means that they can march 16 inches, and they can still shoot the Iron Hail guns 12 inches. So you've got a really, really solid 28-inch range, threat range, which means that if your opponent puts anything on the line or within 4 inches, basically if they're within this line here, I'm going to be able to get into them with an aggressive push. Now, you don't always want to go for an aggressive push, but as you can see over here, if we just look at line of sight, this Dragon Ogre is using the hill to try and hide because it doesn't want to get shot turn 1, but it does mean that, yes, you've got line of sight like this, so you could probably see across here. So as long as I'm past this line, I've got decent potential to be hidden. So just draw that line again. That's roughly where the Dragon Ogre can see. This unit over here, not a melee unit. I'm not super worried about getting in combat with them. So if I wanted to touch the hill, if I had the movement to do so, I'd be okay with that. Then we've got the Warhounds. They're not going to do anything other than march block or, move block. But the Sky Lanterns have fly, so it's not a problem at all. Over here, you really don't want to be getting too aggressive, and the trade-off of using the Warhounds to protect the right flank, so making it harder for the cannons to shoot over this way, is it does mean that you lose the ability to actually get a turn 1 charge if you haven't, if you're still here. That said, obviously the Sky Lanterns are large targets, so there's potential ways around. Not in this case, because this unit here won't be able to march to clear the space. But vision is good. So my thinking here is I can play around my opponent in a way that makes it very difficult for them to interact with me, and I'm probably just looking to, again, if I mark this one out over here, let's get rid of the deployments. So mark this out over here. You can be very, very aggressive with this list and not be punished in a lot of situations. So we're just going to march forward 16 inches, directly forwards. Do we care about anything else? Nope. And this would put us, let me just double check, technically in the line of sight of that Dragon Ogre. So I'm just going to go, assuming it's facing the correct way, I'm just going to wheel 0.5 and then move 15.5, and now comfortably out of any charge arcs. No way for this Dragon Ogre to get into me, but I am able to shoot into the things that I want to, start clearing out my opponent's chaff. Then over here, as long as I don't kill this unit, which I'm pretty happy not to do, the line of sight is going to come past here. So if I just sort of draw a rough line, and in person I'm going to be marking this out with dice, because it's important to make sure that you're not giving your opponent any easy ways to get into you. You don't want to cause panic tests and allow your opponent to reface. That's going to be a big thing. So let's say I put a lantern here, and that was a unit that really scared me in melee. If I shoot enough of them to cause a panic, and they fail the panic, fall back in good order this way, then they reform this way, you really don't want to do that. So you just got to be careful about picking your targets. Line of sight is going to be something along those lines, not being precise, and then over here as well. So I've got a nice little pocket to sit into. So if I just do that, I'm probably going to go, let's say, 1 inch here. Yeah, that puts me roughly where I want to be. And then 15 inches like here. So even though the opponent will be able to see me with their Chaos Knights, like so, they won't be able to charge me because there is currently a unit of Chaos Warhounds in the way, and I can just sort of follow that one up with another move. So what I'm going to do actually is let's just put 12-inch radiuses on these so we can see the range of the move and shoot guns, and if we just do the same here as well before we move them. And let me get rid of this so we can actually see. So you can see the threat ranges. So here, very comfortably able to get in and shoot some dogs. So what I'd like to do is put 1, maybe 2 more units into the Chaos Knights on turn 1. Get as much of an aggressive line of fire as I can. So let's just have a quick look here. If I was to go wheel 0.4, then I can go 15.6 like this. Okay. I've got unbroken line of sight onto the Chaos Knights over here, and then the other one, probably going to struggle a little bit with how aggressive this one's going to be in terms of getting line of sight and range, but let's just see if we can manage it, which would be to go 0.5, 15.5. So this is just turn 1, and already I've managed to... Let's have a look here. If I clear the lines off, clear the vision off. Is this one in range? No. So not in range, which means that I'm probably going to be looking to prioritise killing these dogs, chipping away at this unit as much as possible, and definitely not killing this unit of dogs here, because I'm using them to screen my my balloons. I don't want them to get caught. Turn 1, going into the shooting, I'm not going to bother rolling it out, but let's say I kill 4 Chaos Knights here, completely wipe this unit of Warhounds, because, you know, I've got 2 that can only shoot into it, and 2 that can shoot into the Chaos Knights. These are fairly standard numbers. In fact, I think it might be a little bit undercooked in terms of what the actual potential damage is, but that puts us in a position where my opponent are coming into their turn 1, has no recourse in terms of actual ranged output. This Shartak here can't charge. These dragons over here, so worried about the cannons, which, you know, theoretically can shoot twice, have just played it really safe, haven't come forward, well, have deployed so they can't see. But even if they could see, you know, we've got a line of sight like this, all we end up doing is maybe this model over here ends up back here. It just stays out of charge range, although I think it probably already is. Yeah, I maybe just go a little bit further backwards, so I maybe end up like that instead of where I am. So very easy to play around with even the fast models. Coming into my opponent's turn, if they then try and set up a net where maybe they've got a couple of dragons where, I don't know, let's have a look. So we've got... we could end up something like this with one of the dragons, and then the other dragon can end up something like so. And then if we go like this, and then just get the Chaos Warhounds out of the way. So let's just march them as far as possible, just to clear things up. So as you can see, just it doesn't really matter what the actual outcome is, but you can see that there's going to be very difficult. It's very difficult for the Chaos player who's playing around with actual 90-degree vision arcs to catch the units that I'm looking for. Theoretically, coming into my turn, clear off the lines again and just have a look at roughly what we can see. So if we mark the vision arcs here, you can see that there's not really anywhere to go. If I want to be close, if I want to be shooting, then I have to be sort of far forwards, or, you know, maybe my opponent's put the Shartak like this as well to make it so it's really hard for me to get in. Right now, there's no sort of dead zones where I can sit in any of this sort of section of the map over here. This is all really covered, but in order to do so, oh, and let's put this Shartak over here as well, something like this. You know, I'm not worried about being charged by a Shartak. It's not going to do enough damage to me. So I can sit pretty comfortably in this sort of area here and still get plenty of shots into this unit of knights. It's going to be really hard for the non-dragon, the non-balloon player to really cause issues for me. So if I was just to move sideways, let's say 1, 2, 3, all of these are within 12 inches of the unit, and then this one maybe just moves this way. With its double move, it ends up over here by the time it's reserve move. Something like that. The specifics don't matter too much. Do some shooting, kill another few Chaos Knights, move the balloons 8 inches reserve move, so you get to move them a second time. If I position this better. Let's assume that I've positioned this better, so I'm out of charge arcs there. And then this balloon could theoretically just move backwards, so I'm not in any charge arcs. Charge ranges, sorry. So you can see already, just through very basic positioning, the balloon player is going to find it very easy to run around multiple armies like this. MSU is going to find it really difficult to deal with the balloons, and the armies that are going to find it a little bit easier are things like full pressure lists. Something that the balloon list is going to find a lot more difficult to play around is a full pressure list that goes very wide, that's got a lot of units. So something like Beastmen, like a full pressure Beastmen list, if we've got like 3 Razor Gore like here spread out, they've got a longer range than the balloons do. Obviously the balloons can only shoot 12 inches. These Razor Gore do have a 16-inch threat range in terms of declaring charges, so if you mark that out, suddenly you see that you can start to make a protective layer of the... there we go. So if the balloons are anywhere in this range, obviously I'm able to charge. There is Fire and Flee and Feign Flight on there as well, but you do have to be more respectful of your opponent's pressure, because you can only Fire and Flee so many times. If, you know, my opponent is full sending and turn 1 ends up here, and then turn 2 ends up here, I've run out of space to run, fire and flee very quickly. I have to come past them, which is difficult to do if they layer their sort of positioning. The other thing that's going to be really difficult to maneuver around is stuff like these gigantic spawns. So gigantic spawn, turn 1, it only moves 9. Cool, no worries. Then let's say I move into range to pepper it because there's nothing else that's super good for me to go for. That's a risk. Even if I was to get behind it, obviously the way random movers move, oh okay, I've got an 8-inch move, so I'm going to go 4.7, 3.6, would have been slightly out of range, but assuming you roll like an average roll, you don't have to have vision with the gigantic spawn because it's a random mover to get in, and that's going to be the sort of thing that really causes issues for these balloons. Not all random movers are going to do it. I think if we're talking about stuff like the squig hoppers, I'm not sure they've got the output to get there. Maybe they do, actually. It is strength 5. But specifically stuff like the gigantic spawn, which is going to put, quite a lot of output in there and alongside the stomps, has the ability to not take any real damage with the high toughness, and then also the armor save and the regen. You're not taking stand and shoots because obviously can't stand and shoot into a random mover, can't fire and flee. So something like these gigantic spawn is going to be very difficult for the Cathay army to deal with, which means that you're probably going to find that the Grand Cannons are going to treat them as priority number 1. These are the things that the cannons are going to go for in this sort of list. So just a couple of thoughts to play around with if you're thinking of either playing as or playing around against the balloon army. I think it's a really risky, risky is the wrong word. I think it's going to be a really strong list to play. I think it's going to be quite a high skill cap in terms of you've got positioning. If you're using the rules should make it easy in terms of you've got an 8-inch fly, you've got a lumbering pivot at the end of the move, which I wasn't even particularly using there because I didn't feel like I needed to in the example. But you've got an 8-inch move, a lumbering pivot, and then another 8-inch move with reserve move. So those rules should make it easy for you to get around the board. But the fact that the bases are so big, these 100 by 100 mil bases, 10 centimeters squared, that's a really difficult base to position in terms of overlapping charge arcs. And when you've got multiple of them, this is only a list with 4, you could definitely run a list with 5. I think 6 is probably pushing it if you want to also put the artillery in, which I think is good. Yeah, it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to interact with. So we've talked about what makes the units good, we've talked about how we might put them together, we've talked about some vague ideas about how they might play on the tabletop, although it's difficult to actually see that put into practice until you're playing against someone else. It's very easy for me to shadowbox and be like, I saw that play coming. So I'll definitely be looking to get a couple of games in with the Sky Lantern so I can bring you some actual battle reports against good players where you can see how easy or difficult it is for the Sky Lanterns to be in or out of line of sight, depending on what sort of play you're going for. But what is good against them? Now, as I said yesterday, Pegasus in the room, Falconhorn and the Banner of the Warped Moon right now make this probably unplayable in singles. Here's the thing, I think a lot of people are expecting to see both of those nerfed down to a once per game as soon as we get the FAQ, which is going to be basically when Cathay actually launches. So in terms of seeing these at a tabletop level, or especially if you're seeing them in terms of at tournaments, you're probably not going to see this before the FAQ comes out, at which point I think it's very likely that Falconhorn and the Banner of the Warped Moon do end up not seeing the light of day. With that said, do the once per game turning off fly move abilities nerf this army? Maybe, kind of, it depends. I think specifically against Bretonnians, who are probably going to be going second, if they're going for the Grand Army version, which, it depends how things shake out. But if we see Bretonnian players still looking to take that Falconhorn, turning off your ability to fly for 1 turn, if you go first, you're probably just putting 6 cannonballs into that and not really worrying about the fact that you've lost some potential output, because that was their one tool to potentially try and catch you. Also, you can still fire and flee a normal distance, even though you only move 1 inch, so depending on where you set up, where you move to, where you get into range, I think there's real play for you to not have to worry too much about even a once per game turning off. If your opponent's bringing it something like Banner of the Warped Moon, potentially if it gets changed to just this turns off once per game, even there's no leadership reroll in there, which is what I'd assume if it does get changed to once per game. Beastmen would have a better time against you because they could bunker that in a unit. It doesn't have to be a small unit, it could be a bigger unit, something that you could really struggle to shoot off the board before they get a chance to use it. So that might be an issue, and also Beastmen do come in with random movers. Random movers, I think, are going to be very strong into this sort of army. So we've seen a move away from Gigantic Spawn, because we've seen so much in terms of the poison shooting bricks. Maybe this is enough to start bringing them back, and we get a little bit more of like a rock, paper, scissors, where the poison shooting bricks are probably pretty decent into the lanterns, actually, thinking about it, because obviously the lanterns are large targets, so you can get a good number of shots in. So yeah, maybe the answer is just more poison shooting bricks, which is not something that makes me happy as a dragon player, but, you know. So we've got poison shooting bricks as one potential answer. Reserve moves are something that are really strong into it as well. Obviously, there's no way to fire and flee, stand and shoot, just flee in general away from reserve mover. You'll make contact. You don't have to be in vision arc at the start of your move. You can just wheel round and tap them. So there's plenty of space there for you to, potentially catch your opponent with random movers. So maybe that makes it stuff like orcs and goblins are probably very good at doing it. Maybe we see the poison shooting bricks and then the mangler squigs make a return to form, or the night goblin characters on the giant cave squigs, although I don't think either of those have necessarily enough damage to one round them. Maybe it's enough to pin them in place, or put them in a difficult spot. Obviously the sky lanterns can run away, but maybe it's enough to put them in enough difficult situations where between the poison shooting and the random movers they don't have much of a game plan in terms of staying away. Another option is, what about other shooting armies? Obviously, you could potentially go with something like a dwarf gun line, who would theoretically rip through them pretty quickly if you come in range of the Iron Drakes, which you'll have to do in terms of they've got a longer shooting range than you do, unless you go with the crane gun build. Dwarf Iron Drake spam, something that could potentially see them falling down, especially depending on whether the rumours are true, where, you know, the Drake gun gets nerfed, the Trollhammer torpedo even gets nerfed, but, you know, that sort of thing could really punch those balloons out of the sky pretty quickly. And enemy artillery as well. If there's lots of artillery, it's going to become a little bit of a who goes first. With that said, you can protect your artillery with this list by putting the cannons behind the Sky Lanterns. Given that Sky Lanterns are large targets, the cannon's ball's going to hit them and it's going to immediately stop, which doesn't make any sense from a flavor perspective, because, you know, there's a cannonball that just goes through the actual balloon itself, which is made out of some sort of tissue paper or something like that, but that's enough to stop a cannonball. Anyway, logic aside, I think those are the sorts of things that we need to start thinking about in terms of, if this becomes a dominant force in the meta, it's going to be something that we can potentially stop with random movers, poison shooting, all of these bits and pieces. Also, just to maybe calm the thoughts as well, we did think that the Royal Host brick was going to be a huge meta shake-up, and actually I think in terms of how good of a list it is, in terms of if it's played online, it's a very good list. It does take a reasonable amount of skill to play it well. It's not something that gets played, you don't just play it on autopilot, you've got to make the right decisions. But it's such a large number of models, there's a real cost involved in building it and painting it in terms of money, but also time. Maybe we see that people don't really want to buy 5 balloons when they're coming in at about 100 quid each, give or take. So maybe that's something that means that this is more of an online list than a tabletop list, and all of the doom-mongering ends up not mattering to 99% of the people who do all of their games against people that they either know and arrange games into, or, you know, physical tournament games, that sort of stuff there. Thank you for watching, thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Grail Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.